My name is Jim Brown. I work with Epic Games, and we are doing a crazy experiment in open development. As game creators, we often talk about how video games are very special because they are interactive. And this gives us the opportunity to have a very unique relationship with our players. But at the end of the day, if I go home and sit down and I'm going to play one of your games, it's not you and I who are actually doing that interaction, and therefore it's not you and I who are actually forming any sort of meaningful relationship, right? Well, we start to wonder, what if you could? And there we go. So what if you could actually build a game that brought game developers and the game community together? Not just to give them a peek behind the curtain, not just to get feedback, but to actually include everyone in every step of the process along the way and truly build a game and a relationship together. So thinking like that is what led us down this path toward doing open development in building the next Unreal Tournament. So what is open development? We're building a game out in the open, where every single thing that we do, every change that we make, takes place instantly. It affects the game in real time, and anyone, anywhere in the world can contribute. We see it as open content, an open code base, and open communication. Really, open development is up to you. It could be any of these things or any mixture of these things. But since this is our crazy experiment, we're actually trying to do all three. We have an open code base, so that from the very first line of code that went into the project, before the game was even available, or before the game was even playable, you could download the game and try and play it, or change it, or contribute. We look at our content the same way. The editor and all the game content, including the source files, are all available for download. And that's not just limited to in-game content. If you look at our web content, our theme music, our game's logo, all of it was actually created by our community. And of course, open communication. And by that I mean, this isn't just some silly PR stunt. I'm not trying to recruit anyone. We're not trying to sell you anything. We're looking for honest, two-way conversations with our community with extreme transparency into everything that we do and where we're going with our project. And just to be clear, this is different. This is not crowdsourcing. This is not open source or outsourcing. It is a highly collaborative project between us and our community. We lay the foundations of the systems, and then we let the community run with that, and we build alongside them. We are the gatekeepers. We get to say, ultimately, what gets into the game and what doesn't, but we strive to make those decisions as transparent and collective as possible. And the first question that people tend to have when I start talking about this is why? Like, why in the world would an established company with a good track record and developed process want to even try something like this? And we're doing it because we think it's important to empower your game community, because Epic's values mesh very well with this type of development, because the Unreal franchise is well equipped to handle the stresses of this, and because we feel like we have the right people and the right community to actually make this work. Or at least those were our major assumptions going into this project. And what I'd like to do is actually look at each of these sections in detail and see how they actually played out for us over the course of the last year. And there might be elements, hopefully there will be elements of this that you can take with you, maybe not the whole thing altogether, but pieces that you can actually use on your own projects or continue to develop further, because this is still very much an experiment for us. So first item on this list, we wanted to do this project because it's so important to empower your community. If you've ever actually listened to me talk before at GDC or one of the other things that I've done, you may know that I'm a huge advocate for community. And I like to reference an example from Gears of War to kind of frame or explain my thinking. By the time we shipped Gears of War 3, I had been working on that franchise for nearly a decade. And just running through my head, I had probably invested months of time into each and every map, and I let that experience guide my design decisions. And then we held our public beta. And in just 2 weeks, our least popular map in the beta saw over 1 million matches. And if you do some quick math there, that means that our least popular map in just 2 weeks saw over 200 man-years of gameplay time. And when you take the feedback from that beta and compare it to my small months of playtime spread out over several years, you can kind of get to see the knowledge and experience that is potentially held within a gaming community. And so for Unreal Tournament, we want to leverage that knowledge and experience to help us build a better game. So the question, of course, is how do you unlock that potential once you recognize that it's there? And we tried to break it down into a relatively simple 3-step process with interaction, connection, and acknowledgement. As we become more and more connected as people, social media and other technologies that are out today, it's easier than ever for you as a designer to actually know specifically what your players want rather than relying on assumptions or interpretations. But a helpful community isn't something that you can just create out of thin air. Not every game has one. It's something that takes work and time and a commitment to consistent, meaningful interaction. So for UT, as an example, this means that we play the game every single day with our community. We also blog, and we use our wiki pages and social media and our forums, and we look for every single opportunity we can to actually interact. Larger tasks like our forums, which are quite large, are split between everyone on the team to ensure that every section, every topic gets touched by at least one developer every single day. We make it our job to prioritize interaction, and no one on the team is exempt from that, because relationships only start to form when you're actually interacting with the people in your community. Other industries have already seen success in leveraging this kind of community power and community interaction, and the game industry is really only just starting to catch up with that. How many people have used TripAdvisor to plan a trip? Several hands go up. I know I have, and you're not alone. As of 2010, a study from Cornell has shown that social media is now the #1 factor that people use in choosing a hotel. That means that in today's world, an established brand name or a multi-million-dollar marketing budget is less important than the opinion online of a complete stranger. So with a very small team and essentially zero budget on Unreal Tournament, you can see why we would want to look at this type of social phenomenon very, very closely. TripAdvisor says that they have over 200 million traveler reviews and opinions. That's a lot of eyes. I'd like to have that on my game. But you notice how they separate traveler reviews from the opinions? If you think about it, those are really the exact same thing. By separating the two terms, though, your brain starts to think that the review is somehow more important, that it's more significant, because that review comes from someone just like you, and that makes you think that you can have their same experience. And that's the same kind of feeling that we want to encourage with our game. Hey, my friend enjoyed this game, so I will too. I'm going to go tell my friends, and we'll all start playing together. But we're working on a game where every single change that we make, including every single bug, immediately impacts our players' experience. And who do you think it is that's most likely to actually write a review and tell a friend about the game that they just played? It's not the guys who are having a good time. They're busy playing. It's actually the people who've had a bad experience with your game. So we didn't really think about that too much in the very beginning, but it kind of makes perfect sense. The person who had a bad experience, something happened to them. So there's some sort of narrative for them to tell in that review, and that makes it more fun and more interesting, not only to write, but to read. And that alone makes it seem more real and more relevant to you personally in your own experiences. So as we go out to interact with our community, we have to be explicitly clear that this is a crazy project that's in early development, even though it's completely obvious to most developers. We use our forums, our menus, our game UI, and pretty much every opportunity we can to tell you why you should not play our game. This is probably not our wisest marketing decision. But we're not trying to reach everyone yet. We're looking for a very specific type of player. And as new players come into our community, especially players who don't really understand what they're getting themselves into, we have to reach out and interact with them before they can form that negative impression. Just throwing the term alpha or beta on there sadly doesn't mean anything anymore because that's been co-opted a lot and it's become a marketing term in our industry as of late. So, of course, there is no way that you can make that contact, make that interaction with every single person in your community. And even if you could, that's probably not enough because connections are only meaningful, or interactions are only meaningful when they actually start to connect people instead of just respond to them. So we try and raise the power of the entire community by actually building connections. And our movement system is a really great example of this. We created a template using UE4's blueprint system, which is a visual scripting system. And it gave the community the opportunity to define for themselves how the game's movement should work. We let the community drive the entire process with just some simple variables, rather than have the Epic team create something and then try to explain it to our players or justify it as this is what we were thinking, when really we want to know what they were thinking. And this totally empowered our community. Our small 10-person development team is getting input from thousands of people all over the world. Our players have taken these blueprints and created not only their own unique movement systems, but ways to share those ideas that we didn't think of. We see not just blueprints, but ASCII art, diagrams, videos, anything that they can use to get their point across, and this is exactly what we hope to see. The community is playing the game and testing their own ideas together. They're actually connecting to one another. They learn what works, what doesn't work, and how a game is actually made. And as they form these meaningful connections, they begin to self-regulate, which means that the very best of those ideas start to bubble up to the surface, and then we can take those best ideas and combine them. We can unify them into a single movement system for the game that is significantly more robust and versatile than anything we've ever been able to create on our own in the past. So thanks to our community, we're actually creating a better game that reaches more people in a more significant way, and we've done it simply by connecting them to one another and then back to ourselves. So how do you thank someone for all of their hard work like this? I mean, these aren't our employees. These are people who are just volunteering to do this. They're real people with real lives, and unlike a real community, like where you live, people in a virtual community can just disappear. They don't need a reason, they don't need an explanation, they don't need warning. Because real life does happen. We actually planned on a major update of the game for last March, and we were really relying on one of our community creators to deliver a new weapon for us. Well, he got a new job, and so he didn't have all that spare time that he had before, so he didn't finish the weapon. We were relying on some concept art from one of our community artists, and he had the audacity to go get married and enjoy his honeymoon instead of work on our project. So despite having this huge community of potential contributors, we actually found that we were still reliant on a very few key number of people. And we started to wonder why other people weren't contributing more. There were plenty of people out there who were doing great work and that we had seen, but we had never actually bothered to acknowledge that work. So we started publicly acknowledging everybody's work that we could. Even if it wasn't successful work, just the fact that they donated their time was meaningful to us. So we started doing features in our weekly streams. We started tweeting and doing other social media stuff. We established a public forum that was dedicated solely to bug reporting so that even non-creators could contribute to the game without having to actually build or create anything, essentially just by playing it. And then we started issuing these badges that would show up in the game and in the forums so that the entire community would know exactly who was building Unreal Tournament. And more, people started to see their name and their work actually show up in the game. And that meant that their input began to drive our schedule, and they could see that. So our schedule had become their schedule, which meant they started contributing more. Simple acknowledgement led to higher player investment. There are other small ways that we do try and reward contributors, but there's still a lot more that we could be doing because this acknowledgement is such a vital step in this process. An empowered community has a direct impact on your game, both for good and for bad. A study from Harvard found that a 1-star increase on Yelp can actually mean a 10% difference in profits. The community has real power here. Between 0 and 5 stars, that's potentially a 50% difference in money. And can you imagine how different your life would be and how different your company would be if they were making 50% more or less than they currently are? That's essentially life and death. And translating that directly into game terms, here's another study that showed that positive tweets are actually 9 times more effective than an increase in advertising spend, specifically on video games, and lead to significantly higher profits. So communities have already taken this position of authority in our industry, whether you recognize it or not. And if you don't acknowledge them properly, it's probably going to end very badly for you. To quote one of the developers on our team, anonymous internet assholes ruin everything. All it takes is one silly mistake, one stupid bug on our part, and that issue can become international front-page news that has the potential to damage your brand. Thanks to social media, everything is now instant. It is now very, very personal, and every comment is there and part of that permanent record that anybody can go back to and review at any time. So to make things even worse, you have no idea who these people actually are. Yelp uses the tagline, real people, real reviews, but that same study that I mentioned from Harvard actually says that up to 20% of the reviews that you read on Yelp are fake. Means that success and failure is now based on the opinions of people who might not actually exist. This is trolling at its finest. But with open development, we actually think we have a better chance of fighting this. Our extreme transparency works in our favor here. Everyone can track our conversations. They can recall the exact path that we took to arrive at a decision. And since those decisions are made with the community, they are a collective decision, and in theory, that means that the trolls are going to hold less power. The community can call their BS or ignore them entirely, but that really is only going to work if they're empowered to do so and acknowledged for having done it. And all of this really only starts to scratch the surface of the benefits we've seen from this process. The community reviews all of our work, including the stuff done by our project leads, and this has forced us. It's improved our work habits by forcing us to be clear, to be more focused, and to be properly scheduled. We get instant feedback to know whether our choices were good or bad, and bugs show up earlier. And all of our weekly builds are therefore much more stable and kind of pre-vetted against the trials of our most dedicated and hardcore fans. Now, there are, of course, drawbacks to this process. A simple bug or a feature change that is caught by someone who has a large or particularly influential social network can spread very, very quickly. And that means that we can jump on it, and we can fix it and try and spread the good news by those same social channels, but that's very unreliable. And it means that we actually have to drop something else that we're working on. So if we need to change our plans simply to stop the spread of bad information, that means that something else that's actually important gets put on hold. And figuring out that balance of when to respond and when not, and what to do and what not to do, is something that we still struggle with every single day. But by focusing on these three basic ideas, our goal, as I said, is to actually develop a community that is capable of self-management. I would encourage you to take these ideas and continue to build on them, to think about how you can empower your own communities, or even the team that you work with every single day. Especially in that last area, I truly feel that there is still a lot of work to be done. All right, another reason that we wanted to do open development was that the model is a really good fit for our company culture. Open Develop allows us to leverage three areas that I think makes Epic somewhat unique. We are intentionally very small, and we need to find ways to leverage that as an advantage instead of a disadvantage. Epic is not only in the business of making great games, but I think we also have a pretty cool engine that we work with. And we have this weird mindset where no matter what, we think that we can force this to actually happen because we have this uncompromising commitment to finishing things and making them the absolute highest quality that they can be. Now, obviously, this may not be a fit entirely for your company, but for us, it's almost a necessity. Yes, we do have several studios across the globe, but each of them is incredibly small. Some of them are like one or two guys in an office, and we call that an international studio. We have worked with big-name publishers in the past, but we are and always have been completely independent. The only people that we're actually beholden to are our fans. Everything we do and everything we are, we owe to our community. So making a game with that community fits very well into that philosophy. Generally speaking, our teams, as I said, have always been very, very small. I was the multiplayer lead on the original Gears of War. That team was 3 people total. We did double that for the second Gears of War, and we doubled that again for the third one, which brings us up to around a dozen people on a team, which ironically is about where we are with the original Unreal Tournament and the team that we're working with today. And we can pull that off because at Epic, our titles don't define our roles. So far on this project, I have worked on game design and level design and weapons and characters and web development and UX and level scripting and coding and art, and I am the audio director and one of the QA guys and music director and on and on. And the point is that I'm not in any way unique on our team. We all do whatever we can to bootstrap the process of game development, and that indie spirit is just kind of part of our DNA. And that stems from the shareware days when Epic actually used small remote teams to build about 24 games before anyone had ever even heard of Unreal. So this idea, speaking of shareware, this idea of releasing a game for free isn't exactly a new concept for us either. All of this whole process is really just us returning to our roots. Even our tools are free, and whenever we can, we release them alongside of our games. And that alone takes some of the stress off of this open development process because it means that there's already people out in the world who are familiar with our tool sets. However, people are most familiar with those tools in relation to their own games or their own projects. And that meant with UT, we had a chicken and egg problem. Without developers, there's no game. Without gamers, there's no pool of people to pull those developers from. So when we originally launched UT, we went with this message that was, hey, come build the game and play with us. And we hoped that people would be inspired by that. But in reality, our players were totally confused because if you've ever played an in-development game, it's not fun, it's full of bugs, and hey, guess what? It's incomplete. It's not really playable. And our modders were confused because when we first launched the project, our tools were still in development as well. We had only just soft launched Unreal Engine 4, which meant that we had incomplete tool sets. So we wanted you to play and build with us, but you had to struggle to do either. And it was incredibly difficult for us to generate a stable base of players. Now, luckily this problem went away with time, as both the game and the engine have developed and matured quite a bit over the course of the past year, but it did set us back. And this was especially frustrating to us because we have this company-wide commitment to both usability and quality. We hold ourselves to this standard that we just call epic quality. There's no like quantifiable way to say, oh, this measures up to epic quality. We just kind of know it when we see it. But if something isn't deemed to be epic quality, we just won't release it. We'll put it back, go back to the drawing board and start over. And when you're working with this community of inexperienced developers, that epic quality standard is near impossible to achieve. And in constantly striving for it, we actually created a negative feedback loop with our community. There were times where they would create something that was good, but it wasn't quite up to our epic quality standards. So we would give them some feedback and ask them to go another round, and another, and another, and another. Until eventually, they started to think that, hey, if nothing's ever good enough, why am I even going to bother starting? And so they asked us to start producing things that met this mythical quality standard for them to have an example, which we were happy to do. But that actually made our negative feedback loop even worse. When we create something, people expect that it's going to happen quickly because we're the experienced professionals. But a game of UT's scope usually takes a couple years worth of development to finish for a normal team, let alone one that's as small as we are. And so when things didn't just magically appear out of thin air, there was this perceived slow progress going on, and the community started to wonder, why is nothing happening? Do the developers even care about this project? And then when we finally did deliver something, whether it was a new weapon or our new character model there, we hoped that that would inspire people, kind of set that standard that we were looking for. But what it actually ended up doing was intimidating them. We talked to several professional UGC teams, and they were actually worried about their ability to produce content that met this high standard and their ability to do it consistently. And then finally, after waiting for so long to finally get something that they wanted, when people did get it, they were happy, and they were too busy playing the game to be bothered to create more. So maybe all of this means that we started too early. We should have taken the time to set up these kind of base systems and set like, hey, this is what we want the game to be. But I personally am really afraid that that would have changed or kind of subtly diluted this whole open development message that we were going for. That was initially what got us so excited in this project. So that's a hard call to make. But we've definitely learned that you have to avoid that all or nothing mentality in game design. We have found the most success on this project when we prove a concept with a very simple implementation, and then use that as a seed to drive further development down the road. They say patience is a virtue, right? So how did our expectations measure up? I gave us a light green on the last two there because we did eventually get there. But mainly there was like this really good leadership lesson for me in there. That no matter what your company structure is, no matter where you work, you can leverage your team by making sure that decisions get made, but don't bottleneck by trying making those decisions yourself. This will empower people, and with the right tools at their disposal, they will be able to create quality work eventually. All right, so we knew that working with an existing IP would give us an advantage. People know what UT is, and that gives us this common framework to start building from. And as a franchise, UT in particular is very well suited to open development because it is an arena shooter that makes it essentially modular and very versatile. UT has a lot of depth for competitive, skill-based gameplay, but as an entry point, it's very comprehensible. And of course, UT has always been very heavily reliant on including the voice of the community. So Unreal has this reputation for being incredibly eclectic. People call it pyramids in space, because what does that mean? I don't know. But that as a franchise, UT is, as I said, is incredibly versatile. Just versatile enough to support a wide range of styles. It's about a future that is shrouded in the past. Tournaments happen on Earth and on alien planets. There are lizards and zombies and robots and space marines underwater, in the air, on trains. Like, it covers the whole gamut. It doesn't matter because it's all UT. It's the perfect setting for a group of internationally situated community members, no matter what language they speak, no matter what their background is, no matter what their skill set is. But that lack of variety, or that variety, also led to a complete lack of focus. Like, do you love the Egyptian stuff or do you hate it? There tends to be no in-between there. It's kind of pretty distinct. And that made it really hard for our community to rally around a single design idea that we could use as that pillar, that baseline that supported what the franchise was. And we thought that because UT was so comprehensible, it would be easiest to find that baseline in the actual gameplay. But remember that this is actually the 4th Unreal Tournament game. And the first one looked like this. Not necessarily the greatest screenshot, but I chose it to highlight the fact that there are low ceilings, tight corridors, and relatively realistic proportions. The gameplay here was very, very grounded and focused on the weapons and the gunplay. And it's kind of universally accepted that this was the best version of UT ever. Except for this one, which was the second UT. And it was the complete opposite of the first. It had huge open spaces, double jumps, and so much flying through the air that if your feet touched the ground, people mocked you for playing the game wrong. And yes, those dots there are actually enemy characters. So that strange scale reinforced that this game was not about being grounded. Instead of gunplay, this one was about skill and movement and getting across the map. And if you played it, this was the best UT ever, except for this one, which was the 3rd UT. Had these really cool graphics and captured all the best aspects of the previous 2 games. It had absolutely the best weapon balance of any in the franchise and a mixed movement style that allowed you some freedom to do cool things, but people weren't flying away like kites. And yes, this was the best UT ever, or the absolute worst, depending on who you ask. And it reminds me of this classic debate between Coke and New Coke. They did extensive blind tasting that proved, without a doubt, that New Coke tasted better. But it still failed, because taste wasn't the important thing that people actually cared about. What they really cared about was brand identity. And we see the same thing with Unreal Tournament. Every successive UT game has been technically better than the last. Even from a more theoretical gameplay perspective, every UT is better than the last. And we thought that people loved the flavor of UT. But since each game was so completely different, each audience was also completely different. And every group had their own nostalgic tie to their version of UT in the context of their own life and their own unique identity. So we actually had several niche communities instead of the one united one that we were counting on. And when it came time to bring them together to discuss this baseline of what the franchise actually is, they fought like cats and dogs. So while the basics of UT's gameplay are indeed comprehensible, it didn't turn out to be the advantage that we hoped it would be. Understanding that magic formula that brought the UT community together was significantly more challenging than we expected. And I want this to serve as a reminder to everyone that no matter how well you know your game, you still need to do your research to make sure you understand your audience, and preferably you do that before you start building. And this is especially true of sequels. You can't just go off and introduce new features and assume that your classic audience still wants to play the game. Even if it is actually a better game, it may not be what they want. And if you don't know for certain who your audience is, then how can you ever possibly build a game for them, or in our case, along with them? One significant factor that helped us overcome that hurdle was that UT already has a reputation for being incredibly inclusive. Every UT game has had a great community where they communicated well with the developers, and those conversations always shaped the content that went into our future DLC. That DLC, which was always available for free, was often built by the community itself. There was a whole series of community bonus packs, or even as a collaboration between Epic and the community working together. The entirety of the second game was built with in-house contractors that came from the community, and the third UT actually shipped with community-created content already on the disk. So bringing the community into the fold early in the development process instead of after ship was a really easy, logical step for us. But as I mentioned earlier, a lot of our assumptions about who that audience was, we made a lot of assumptions about who that audience was, and we failed to see one of the biggest distinctions that was the most problematic, and that's that independent of the game version, there's this baseline philosophical difference between modders and players. And so we tried to juggle priorities where, hey, we'll make some changes with the modders and then test it out in the players. And then we'll take that feedback and make some changes with the modders and then go back to the players. And this actually ended up segregating our community even more. The players didn't understand the technical reasons behind why the modders had to make their changes, and the modders didn't understand the long-term effects that these minuscule changes were going to have on kind of the long-term gameplay. So rather than attempt to prioritize one over the other or go back and forth, we simply decided to stop treating them as different groups. People have been playing UT for like 20 years now, and at a purely mechanical level, we recognize that nobody knows our game better than those long-term fans. And so the best thing that we can do is to actually recognize that experience by including them in the process as if our players were designers. Instead of just soliciting feedback from them, we push them constantly to offer us solutions. We say, here's the tools. Go make that change that you're suggesting. Let us know how it works out. Show us the result instead of just actually talking about it and wondering. And this really opens up a dialogue that brings players and developers together. And this philosophy definitely goes both ways. The modders and us as developers, as scary as this is, we had to go and play with these experienced players. And yeah, we're never going to be as good as that hardcore pro-level guy. But if you do it enough, you start to gain an important context. And you can learn to look at the game in a whole new light. And then to top this all off, we put a focus on creating a visual tutorial system that not only taught people how to create new things, but more importantly, how to share those creations. And that sharing step was a key part of the puzzle because it not only encouraged people to play the game, like, hey, you just built something, now go check it out, but to invite like-minded people into the fold and show it off to all of their friends. And that built more connections. And as I discussed earlier, it's these meaningful connections that are so essential to building a true community. On the left here, you have a screenshot from one of our tutorials that teaches players how to run, jump, dodge, and get through the world. On the right is a tutorial for modders, how to create your own items, mod weapon skins, and build new levels. We deliberately made these two tutorials look as similar as possible, and we deliberately made them both actually happen in-game. We deliberately mixed our tutorials with tutorials from the community, and we deliberately grouped it all together in one place in our UI under a button that just says Learn. Learn to create, learn to play, learn about the franchise, learn about the community. I don't care, just learn. We want to make learning seamless with design. And that may sound like a small thing, but it was actually incredibly significant for us. We rolled these tutorials and the new system out at GDC in March, and we saw this huge spike in downloads, which we expected because of the increased exposure of the show, but we also started seeing this huge spike in items being created. And then out of the blue, we saw people start to stream UT sessions, not only playing, but just guys sitting at their computer and building stuff on Twitch and YouTube and all kinds of places. And that actually led to better retention, even though we never once changed that message that, hey, you shouldn't be playing this game right now. So the combined effect of all of these should have been the perfect storm for open development, but it was by no means a guarantee. I marked some of these in red because I'm still unconvinced whether it worked for us or against us, or maybe a mixture of both. So if you think that your IP may be similar in any way, I would encourage you to look at this as a good starting point and investigate more before you jump in. I said in the beginning that we think we have the right people and the right community to make this experiment a success. And it definitely does take a very special type of person to put up with this. But I mean that as a compliment to everyone who's touched the project, not only the developers, but our contractors and everybody in the community who has really come together and delivered on this crazy dream of ours. We have an amazing group of people that has actually been dedicated to Unreal for a significant portion of their life. For some of us, this is actually our 5th game in the Unreal Tournament franchise and our 10th game in the Unreal franchise. The Unreal Editor has shipped with every one of those games, and Epic has run a Make Something Unreal contest with every release of Unreal Tournament. The free tools and the contents have really inspired a lot of people to cross over from community developer to professional developer. And that story is true of every single person on our development team. We were all community modders who became professionals later. And every single one of us modded on Unreal Tournament before joining the industry. So I like to think that as individual developers, these roots give us a very unique perspective, both on modding as well as on community engagement. But stereotypes exist for a reason. So yes, we are geeky game developers. We may arguably be good at designing games, but that doesn't mean that we're good at interacting with or talking to the public. Gamers are a very passionate bunch, which you may know if you've ever been brave enough to venture into one of your own games forums. But the value of a community's contribution exists as more than just the assets that they may donate to you. It's in those ideas and that scary passion. game development is a social science. And especially with this open development model, we're trying to understand human behavior and complex social interaction. We had to learn to communicate better in order to maximize our community interactions, and this was arguably the single most important thing that we learned on this project. One example of that showed up when we decided to actually pause active development for a while and just focus on build stability. This idea was well received by our players, and we got tons of positive feedback, but at the exact same time, our player counts suddenly started to drop off dramatically. Because it turns out that people like new features. And when it gets close to the time when that feature is about to arrive, hey, you start to get excited about that new feature. But with open development, those feature dates are unpredictable, and they're always changing. So it can be hard to maintain that high level of enthusiasm for months on end when nothing's happening. And if you look at the feedback that we got during that stabilization period, there's actually a ton of praise for how good the game looks, how well it runs, and hey, what a great idea this open development thing is. But there's very little hope about what's coming or what the next build is actually going to release. So to combat this, we started releasing weekly build reports that actually built excitement about, hey, this is what's coming next. It's a stupid, simple, obvious fix. But what this really highlighted for us was that you have to look at the context of a conversation, not just those individual positive comments. Because especially in written communication, people use positive words as a way of deflecting bad feelings. Like, how often do you just say, like, oh yeah, that's cool, or oh, okay, when really you don't like something? And especially as you're starting to build and work your way into a new community, you don't want to turn everyone on their head. You don't want to turn everyone against you because you're the one who's saying bad things. So oftentimes it's easier to just deflect so that everyone can save face. People don't always say what they mean, and sometimes they don't even know that there's a difference. And it's up to you to figure that out. We released one build, and out of the blue, people started going crazy saying that our rocket launcher was completely overpowered, even though we hadn't actually made any changes to it. So we did a little bit of investigation, and in the threads, people weren't actually talking about the rocket launcher's power. They were talking about their inability to dodge away from the rockets. So dodge was actually broken. But that hadn't changed either. But even though it didn't change, it led us down the path to actually fixing the problem. In the next build, people thanked us for making the rockets weaker, for slowing the rockets down, and for fixing and overhauling dodge. But we didn't actually do any of that. The only thing that we actually did was add a fire trail to the rockets. Since they were suddenly easier to see, people knew that they were coming and had time to dodge out of the way. We were able to fix the problem that nobody was actually able to communicate to us in writing. At one point, people said that another one of our weapons was too weak, the flat cannon. So we actually added a layer of bass to the audio, and all of a sudden it's doing this satisfying damage. And even though we didn't change the damage values, people thanked us for rebalancing that weapon. And our weapon switch was so slow that our professional pro-level players were literally telling us that it made the game unplayable until we synced the animation with the audio so that that became more of a predictable pattern. And suddenly, the game is not only playable, but better balanced as a result. So my point is that, not surprisingly, we have found that the more specific you are with the information you can give us, the better we can actually address your problems. And that goes both ways. The more specifics that we use to explain the intent behind a change, the better that change is going to be received by our community. And this is where the internet is a huge barrier to communication. An online community is very different from your traditional home communities because technology gives us the illusion of companionship without the demands of friendship. Writing doesn't have that same subtlety that you get from face-to-face interaction. And just because you're part of an online community, that doesn't mean that you're automatically friends with everyone else, and that doesn't automatically make you a good communicator. We had a couple early contributors who were actually doing great work on the game, and they got a lot of positive reinforcement from that, which led to them doing more posting in our forums. Multiple posts per day suddenly became multiple posts per thread, which meant that they started sharing their opinion more than they were sharing information, and that became really annoying. Yes, they may be very, very passionate, but that doesn't make them experienced or knowledgeable as game developers. And even if they are experienced, that doesn't mean they're an expert or that they have any sort of actual authority within the community. So to mitigate this, we actually developed some guidelines that we very jokingly call the Machiavelli's rules of forum posting. You never want to hide important or controversial topics, but because you're a game developer, when you post, it's going to get noticed. Therefore, we say you should only post to discuss game design, particularly with someone whose opinion you respect, to provide positive feedback or encourage people's work, or to clarify plans or correct confusion. This conveys that you are indeed paying attention to important topics and keeps the community focused. But you also want to avoid going overboard. So you never want to post more than once in a conversation, unless possibly something from part one applies, because that avoids debates. And it's always safer to assume that healthy debates do not exist in a game's online forums, because that is just the equivalent of a flame war. So if you absolutely must retort to someone's opinion, do it in a way that will break that debate chain by starting a new thread, and that'll refocus on the important topic instead of focusing on the debate itself. So yes, calling these Machiavellian is very, very tongue-in-cheek, but it does make a difference in how you can help communicate with your community, and this is one of the most important things that you'll need in open development. So ultimately, has this experiment been a success for us? We're only in the pre-alpha stage, so I can't say 100% yes, but I can say that it is working, albeit very, very slowly. Open development has been a challenge for us, but every development cycle has its own challenges, and so this just forces us to look at development in a new way. And we're not alone here. If you look at the growth of Minecraft and Gary's Mod, the way that Bethesda and Valve are trying to bring community content to Steam, regardless of the success they may have had there, creation games are everywhere. And that's because video games are about more than just playing. You interact with the game systems, and you create your own experience. Game communities tend to be very rigid. How often do you hear, oh, you must adapt or fail? For Unreal Tournament, we want to embrace the play community instead, where the game actually changes in response to the players. And with open development, we think that this can actually be the future of making games, not just of playing them. So thank you for your time today. Please remember this is still an ongoing experiment, and it's constantly evolving and changing. So I would love to hear if any of this is actually useful to you, and if it is, how you use it on your own project. So please stay in touch. My contact information is down there. And of course, I'm supposed to remind you to fill out your surveys for the good of me and GDC. So thank you very much. We do have about 5 minutes or so if there are any questions. Yeah.
About what happened with Skyrim and the modding thing in Steam, is money getting into the conversation like, hey, we are helping you build like the new Unreal Tournament, we're going to own it too, but some money is going to come out of it? And
yeah, so we're actually following a model that's very similar to what Counter-Strike or what they're doing on Steam, where there are mods available in our marketplace that are made. Everything there is actually made by our community. So you could build something and essentially donate it to us. You can contribute to the game, in which case you get credit as being one of the developers. And you get access to different forums and opt-in IRC and all these other things. Or you can put that in the marketplace and sell it, and we'd split the profits. So that's, I mean, it's essentially the same model that the Steam community is using, and that's where we're going with this as well. Yay, you guys are quiet. Cool. Enjoy the end of your evening. Thank you very much.